Welcome to the PD Pet Care Vlogs. I'm Dr. Cath Watson. Today we're going to talk about how to tell if your dog is scared. I'm sure you've heard the saying, let sleeping dogs lie. It has a very good reason. I bet when you're fast asleep and suddenly wakes you up in the middle of a beautiful dream, you probably get a fright. Same thing applies to dogs. That's a pretty obvious example of when a dog would be scared. But there's a whole bunch of other environments and situations where dogs will be scared and we don't necessarily pick up on their language. Because yes, they do have a language and it's not a verbal one like ours. They're much more reliant on body language and they actually require us to learn that body language. And it's not just their body that we're talking about, it's also their eyes, their ears, their tails, what their skin is doing, what their lips are doing, what their mouths are doing. It's a whole new language, a bit like sign language, that we need to learn. The problem is the language may not be the same for every dog, and some of the variations that we think of between breeds. If you've got a husky that's got really erect ears versus a spaniel that's got really floppy ears, their communication may not be as good between one another because they're not seeing what they expect. But also we need to understand those differences too. So some of those differences can be physical differences like I talked about with the ears, but also tails. Some dogs' tails stick up, others have very short or non-existent tails, and others naturally have a low carriage. Obviously, with that example of the ears, it's much easier to tell when something like a husky has got its ears pinned back, because they've obviously gone from erect to folded back. And a spaniel, not so easy to tell. Obviously, their life experience also makes a difference as to whether they're likely to be scared in certain situations and so on. So have they been socialised to all sorts of things? Umbrellas, people on skateboards, riding bikes, cars backfiring, thunder and lightning, all that sort of stuff. Some of those things we get a fright from too, but we shouldn't be in an ongoing scared state if we've had a normal upbringing where we've been exposed to the normal stuff that we would expect to see in everyday life. We also need to understand though that dogs have much better senses than us, particularly things like smell and hearing, and there may be stuff that they hear or they smell that they detect in the environment that we are just completely oblivious to, that for some reason causes a fearful response in them. So we've talked about why they might be scared. What sort of body language do we need to look for to tell us that a dog perhaps is not as happy as it should be? So I can start with the eyes. So first up, obviously scared dogs are likely to be very alert dogs. They're trying to decide whether it's fight or flight at this point. So the eyes are likely to be big, and the main thing you'll notice is that you may see a bit more of the whites of their eyes. Obviously we see the whites of our eyes quite commonly, but you don't normally see the whites of a dog's eyes. But their eyes are also likely to look very dark, and that's because the pupil, the part of the eye that helps let the light in, usually goes very, very big when they're scared. So you're going to have these big, dilated, dark looking eyes with a white rim potentially. That's going to tell you that's a dog who's not particularly comfortable where they are. And those pupils can go big very, very quickly. They're also likely to be avoiding eye contact with you and probably going to have their head down. Going to the other end of the body, tails. Tails can tell us a lot, irrespective of whether they stick up normally or stick down. The hard ones to tell are when there's very little tail there at all. But if there is a tail and they're scared, then it's likely to be tucked in between their legs, but it may actually be wagging furiously as well. That's not a sign of happiness, that's a sign of a nervous dog who wants to be happy. So just be aware if that tail is tucked under and wagging furiously, and they may even pee themselves. That's a dog who's definitely very scared. Some of the more subtle signs are things like licking lips. It's not just because they're trying to clean their nose or clean their teeth or get a smell out of their mouth. Licking lips is a pretty good sign that's a dog who's not entirely comfortable with what's going on around them. Same with yawning. They're not just bored with what's going on. In fact, yawning is a sign that things are not so good, not so comfortable in their mind. Then there's the more obvious signs of them being scared. So they might be whimpering or whining, drooling. Maybe less obvious to you is panting. So a panting dog who is relaxed will have relaxed lips, and you won't be seeing their teeth. For a dog who's scared, they normally pull back the corners of their mouth and you'll see much more of their teeth. It almost looks like a smile or a grimace. That's not a comfortable pant. That's a stressed, scared sort of pant. So keep an eye out for that. Obviously shaking and trembling. Some dogs, particularly smaller dogs, may do that for no particular reason. But in combination with those other signs that we've talked about, then obviously you've got a fairly clear idea that that dog's not comfortable in that situation. In extreme circumstances, obviously they're going to be hiding, but as far as their full body, if they're not standing there nice and relaxed, but actually are all hunched up and clearly, trying to make themselves as small as possible, they're scared. Another one, raised hackles. That's not necessarily a dog who's about to attack you, but that's a dog who's saying, I'm really not very comfortable here and I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. And I think that's the big thing when it comes to scared dogs. Scared dogs can be very unpredictable because they really are in that situation of should I try and run away, or do I need to try and defend myself here if I'm going to get cornered? So learn to read those signs, because at the end of the day they're telling us that they're not happy, and it's then up to us to resolve that situation and make sure that they don't end up having to choose fight or flight, both of which are going to end up potentially in a bad situation for them and us. So good luck learning to read your dog's body language, and do take the time to learn what your dog tells you.